Alright, so it's been out for a couple of months now, or coming up on a couple of months now, and everybody's going crazy for it. And the first movie, Villeneuve's first movie, in 2021, was my favorite movie of that year. And between the theater and its digital release within these last couple of months, I have seen it 4 times now, so I guess it's probably time we talk about Dune Part 2. Maybe we've got enough information about it to get to that point now. So let's go ahead and do that. So the thing about it, when you're talking about this, especially like almost a couple of months after it's come out, is there even anything that I can say that people haven't already said, and how much can you even say? Because it's getting to a point to where you could say like, oh my god, it's so amazing, oh my god, it's so epic, oh my god, it's so big. But the thing about this movie is not only is it that can just kind of get redundant and kind of get lost along the way to where it's like, can you even really do those words even do it justice? Like, does this movie just defy complimentary adjectives like pretty much any of them? Like, you can tell somebody over and over again, oh my god, it's so amazing, it's so amazing, you have to see this, it's so amazing. But are you really gonna give them an idea of what this movie's like? Because obviously Villeneuve has become one of those directors where his movies kind of feel like events at this point, which is something we've talked about in the past, but it still feels like it's this sort of dying thing where movies don't quite feel like a movie like this feels kind of unique when it comes out, even though we've seen big epic sci-fi movies before. There's something about these movies and Villeneuve's movies in particular where there's just something different. There's something more. I mean, like the experience is something that's more transportive, I guess you could say. And you could say, there's been plenty of movies in the past like Lord of the Rings or Star Wars or whatever, but I was never really one of those people in my youth that felt particularly transported by movies. Like, I was always kind of aware of, how movies are made and like what sets and stuff like that. Maybe when I saw A New Hope in the theater for the first time in '97, where it was like, oh my god, was that actually in space or something like that. But even in youth, it was very, very rare for it to feel like a movie took place on another planet. And it actually, you like, believed that. And so I remember when I said this a lot about the first movie, the 2021 movie, where that was one of the strengths of the movie, was that it's like you see all the sand and it could just be like, oh, it's just a desert somewhere. But no, the movie makes it feel like the actors are on another plane, and you just kind of, you just get enveloped in it that much. It feels like everything. Like when they were on the Atreides' planet, also, it felt like Caladan. It felt like that was a whole other place entirely that's not of this earth. And the same thing when you look at Arrakis, even if it's just like desert sets or whatever, there's just something so believable about the setting in general, whether it be, the characters or the way it's built up or whatever, the production design, whatever it is. It's just taking you to another place entirely that you feel like you've never seen before, and it's and you would think also that the impact of that wouldn't be as strong or wouldn't be as impactful because the first movie's already happened, so we already felt that with the first movie. So what else can this one do as far as making you feel that, making you feel like you're in another place? um, it can still, even when the locations don't change, even when we're in places we've already been before, even still, it still evokes that feeling just as much as it did 2 or 3 years ago. So that alone, just the setting alone, is powerful in itself, let alone everything else that's going on here. And once you immediately go into that, like when you talk like the very opening scene here after the prologue, when we're back in the desert, we picked up right where the other one left off. They're still transporting Jameis's body back. There's it's stuff that is typical movie magic. Like stuff that's like, it can't be that complicated. You know how they do it. So when this Harkonnen attack happens, and we see the weightlessness when they go up the side of the cliff or whatever, it's like, obviously you can imagine how that was done. Like, people have been floating on screen forever. But it's like the most primitive movie magic there is. Yet somehow, just the way they've made it look so grand, just something as simple as that. Movie magic we've known forever looks impossible. It looks like the impossible is happening. And it looks like something, majestic and insane or whatever. And I think that's also helped by when they start getting picked off and they're dropping to the ground, how much you could sense the weightlessness when they floated up. You can feel the weight when they hit the ground, and like everything feels heavy when it has to feel heavy, and everything feels weightless when it has to do that. And just like I said, just little things like that. You're so engrossed already in the opening moments. You just accept everything feels like a movie magic you've never experienced before, even if you've experienced it, a million times. And that's pretty amazing. Let alone, like I said, the settings we already experienced in the first movie. It's just all the environment that this movie puts you in immediately, and it's incredible. I feel like it gets a little repetitive when anybody would talk about Villeneuve. A word that's going to get brought up a lot, to the point that it may lose its meaning, is the word scale. But when you look at his movies in particular, it feels like he handles that in a way that, once again, you've seen it before, but in a way that feels unique to what he's doing, where it's like even in Arrival, when we saw, the ship, or whatever it is, and how everything looks so small around it. And doing things like that, where you can make things look like they're big, but they're still, you can kind of see movie magic at work. But here, it's just the use of, settings. Like, when you see people just in the desert, they seem really, really small and almost ant-like, in comparison to everything around them. When there's a sandworm and just everything feels small in comparison, or a harvester. When we see Fade walking across the arena, just everything looks so small because everything is so huge around it. And just setting that, as far as making everything feel huge, is something that he's just really mastered at this point. Like I said, in a way that we've seen before, but it doesn't feel like to this extent, which is amazing. And talking about, the worm, there is going to be a scene we've been building to, where Paul rides the worm, which apparently they showed for, promotional purposes and stuff like that, and I'm so glad that I don't look at any promotional stuff or anything like that, or when they show scenes ahead of time for advertising or whatever, because seeing this in context, I feel like there's no other way to see it but in context. And even if you've read the book and you know the story and you see the clip outside of the movie, you still have context, but it's not, like I said, this is a whole other thing as far as adaptation goes, where you think how many times in the past they said the movie was unfilmable, or like Lynch's movie, in quotes, proved that, or whatever. But still, it does feel like there's a difference between reading it in the book and being able to make that. And oftentimes when you make it in your head, there's no way that can be taught, because your imagination can be endless versus what can be put on a screen. Villeneuve makes it feel like whatever he can put on screen, there's endless possibilities. And so to have that sort of same context of, you can pretty much see anything in this movie come to life in a way that feels really just practically real. Where it's even though, there's a lot of CGI and stuff like that, it's still clear that, Chalamet's on top of something that very much appears to be a sandworm. You can see moments where it's just practical enough where everything feels like I was talking about with the sets in general, it feels like you're just watching something actually happen, and you forget that you're watching effects, almost, which is something that's really hard to do, especially with how ingrained that is in our minds as moviegoers now, to look for CGI and effects and, the seams and all that. And to see Paul ride the sandworm, and for it to feel practically like a 4D experience, with the way the theater rumbles, and it's and I was watching it in a small auditorium. I didn't see it in it wasn't like IMAX or Dolby or anything like that. It was just one typical small ass generic ass auditorium, and it was the sound has never been better in that auditorium. Everything was shaking so much. It almost felt like it was even better in a smaller auditorium because it almost amplifies how much you're being shaken by the sound and the rumble of everything. And that's, like I said, it's something that you almost feel like we were getting away from in movies when effects and CGI and stuff like that really started taking over, and that sort of special feeling was kind of going away. It feels like when movies like this come along, we're kind of getting something back that it almost felt like we lost or something, and I think that's something that really makes these particular movies special, and Villeneuve movies in particular. And it's even when I'm not like crazy about his movies, still I feel like anybody who wouldn't be crazy about his movies can still see something in this on a technical scale. Where it's like Blade Runner 2049, where I've never been that taken by the Blade Runner world, like not even Ridley Scott's. But I can still tell you that there's something to the world created in those. But here I'm completely enamored with just everything that he's doing. And it's like we were talking about I was talking about the sound in general and the rumble. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff here that carries over from the first movie that's still just as satisfying as it was before. Like the sound of like the thumper, or the voice, and the way the voice is another thing that shakes the theater, especially in that one crucial moment right at the very end there. And Jessica also, the way her voices kind of come out once she's drank the water of life, it's all. And everything gets a little scarier as it goes, and the sound plays a big part in that also. Even little things like there's something chilling about the way the cover tightens around Jameis's body when they start to drain his water. Just things like that can make an impact, small or big or whatever it is. And like I said, that's setting up the environment that you're in just as much as anything you're looking at, anything you're hearing can do that just as much, which is amazing. And speaking of what you're looking at, the action in this also, I know there were some complaints about people that may not have known, what they were getting into with the first movie, where they might have thought that it was maybe too slow or not enough was happening. But this is kind of the one where you can kind of tell, like, to me, one of the things I praised about the first movie was that even though I knew it was only like half a story or 2/3 of a story or whatever, I don't know. The first one still felt like a complete enough movie to me, even where they cut it off. Like, ending with the fight with Jameis, I was perfectly okay with. I know a lot of people thought The Fall of the House Atreides should have been kind of the climax of it, but I was perfectly happy with the first movie the way it is, and I still am. But it does, especially in retrospect now, it does feel like the first movie is just kind of building up to this. So a movie that can already feel as good as the first movie was, basically, in retrospect, being nothing more than a teaser for this one for the most part. This one has to really deliver, and it's obviously going to do that. So yeah, this one probably has a lot more action, like the people that were disappointed with the first movie probably wanted. There's a lot of thrilling action scenes kind of right away. There's that opening Harkonnen attack we talked about. There's also this other one when we see much more of an action scene sort of happens here. Much more of a battle happens. But what's great is these little... In these movies, they're like these epic movies. It can get kind of draining watching battles where it's like just sort of bodies colliding, and it just kind of gets old really quickly. So what's great about these are they're filled with these thrilling little individual moments like throughout it. Like the moment when, the guy passes by Paul and is headed for Chani, and then she turns around and, shoots him and blows him up and all that. The moment when she's running and the Thopter, like, falls, like, see, it's, as far as, like, the perspective goes, it's almost like it falls right beside her. There's the moment where Paul is running and the thing moves and he does, like, that aw shit just as his little plane is starting to fall apart. Putting all those little individual moments and making one action scene out of those little pieces instead of just making it this generic, oh, look, things are happening, but it's just like basically a blur might as well be happening. So I can really appreciate how specific the action scenes are in those little moments, and even just the way the way the Fremen move, whether they come out of the ground or whatever, and just the way they move in battle, is also the idea of when it does go big, like when you talk about the whole armies colliding thing, and it's well, first of all, what I've always loved about Dune in general, because if I remember correctly, it's the same way in the book where when we get to the climax, it's not really much of there's like one epic collision, and then that's about it. Then we kind of get into the more important factors of what's going on in the story, as the sort of shifts in power are starting to happen. So we get like one sort of army collision, and then it goes into the individual stuff, like the characters we've been following and the characters we've met along the way, and like how it feels like everybody we're seeing has stakes to them. It's not just faceless armies colliding all the time, and it's when we get big moments like the worm army essentially in that particular shot of like the three coming in, and it's like all of it feels like it has a grand purpose, and it's something that we've been building to, and the fact that we have the story and kind of knowing where the story is going to give it more gravity as it happens, and it doesn't just feel like bland action. It doesn't feel like the Hobbit movies or something like that, or like the later Marvel movies or something like that. It feels much more like everything has stakes to it, and they're not spending too much time on these really grand shots, because the things it's doing with the individual characters having smaller moments and smaller battles have just as much, if not more, impact. And the fact that there's so much focus on those rather than always being on the big stuff and how big and long can we make battles. That's another thing too, is battle scenes tend to go on for so long in those other lesser movies that I mentioned, and this one just kind of gets right to the point with what's important and what it is that they're fighting for. You never forget. So that's something that'll always be, and just the fluid movement of everybody. This is the way stuff like that should go. But like we were saying, also there are calmer sections. Also, like we have these big dramatic moments for the story, and we have these gigantic action moments and these gigantic shots and all that. But also the way it's able to have that sort of huge feel while also having these calmer moments kind of at the same time. Like the idea of like the calm evening desert, like that evening desert atmosphere where it's like you get the sense that it's not like the sun is going down, and it's not as like blisteringly hot as it is, and that's when when Paul and Johnny kind of have these moments of themselves, and they do the thing where she's like teaching him how to sandwalk and stuff like that. He's explaining like rain and swimming to her, something that's just like this foreign concept to her. There's even stuff like, this might seem very small, but I've noticed it in like a lot, like even movies that aren't set on another planet, movies that are just set in like present day or whatever. But to see it like in the Arrakis scenes especially, sometimes it feels like when it's not even crucial to the scene at all, it's just something that's happening. When the wind is blowing, I don't, for some reason, just kind of takes me to a place, like to a location, to a scene. And so to see just these moments where like the wind is just casually blowing on Arrakis of all places just gives it this real sort of feeling. Like, I know it's a small thing, and might not mean much to anybody else, but that's just something that like, as it takes me to a certain place or a certain feeling or something. And like I said, to do that and make these fictional planets feel like real places that people really inhabit, is always going to be something that's crucial to how this movie feels, which is great. So, we kind of talked about all the characters like in general, but specifically, obviously we should start with Paul and Timothy Chalamet in particular. In the last video we did, I was talking about Jenna Ortega, and I was talking about how there's a lot of really good young talent right now. Like, usually there was like a stretch there where it's like all the young talent was basically doing like, teen movies or whatever, or straight to streaming movies or whatever. But now we've got the likes of, Timothy Chalamet and Zendaya and Austin Butler and Florence Pugh. And we're so lucky that all four of those people are in this movie. And there's just like a whole new level here As far as like talking about Chalamet first, he's been wowing us for quite some time now. At least since Call Me by Your Name, when he really said like, hey, I'm not the kid from Love the Coopers or whatever. I'm like a really serious actor. His small part in Interstellar. Um, and then from then on, he's like just proven himself over and over and over again. But this is like a whole other level. This is something where it was like, it almost feels like, even though, Call Me by Your Name was back in 2017 and he got an Oscar nomination, and then he did like Beautiful Boy like right after that, and then he's been in, big projects ever since then. Bones and All, he was great in. But it almost felt like despite all the stuff he's already done already and how many times over he's proven himself, it almost feels like the real, true testament to what Chalamet can do was going to be, can you make the Paul from the first movie the Paul that he is by the end of this movie? Can you do that successfully? And if you do that, that's basically your rite of passage to say, I'm one of the best young actors that's working right now. Like right there towards the top. And that's pretty much exactly what happened. And I had heard some people kind of be skeptical. I was open minded because he had already been very impressive by this point, but I did have in the back of my head kind of like, how convincing is he going to be as the really dark version of Paul? And we already got glimpses of it in the first movie. When the voice kicks in and he says "Get off me" to Jessica, and he has that whole thing and that whole speech, the father skull speech. That's where it's like it was already coming in. You can already get little glimpses of what Paul is going to become there, but still, when it becomes the full commitment of the character and the character goes all the way there, could have been tricky, especially seeing the progression as we get there. But the way, not just Chalamet, but the movie as a whole does that transition is actually really well done, especially for the amount of time that the movie has. Because obviously the book can really take its time, and it does. But here we have to use tricks like the montage of battle scenes to show like the passage of time, and to show like his sort of growing reputation and his rise to this power that he's coming into. And it's like to see Paul come in with like this power and this like how he's full of like a thirst for vengeance, and how that's been darkening him along the way, but still these moments come in like the moments we talked about with Chani. There are calmer moments and lighter moments. There's the point where he still has to be the young kid that's being taught, like when Stilgar's teaching him about the desert and stuff like that, and like, Chani's obviously teaching him things. He's doing foolish things like telling Chani of Fremen like, oh well, in my books it says you have to do this. And it's like, dude. And so he's still like that kid in there that needs to learn, but the transition is happening kind of at the same. You can see it, him becoming less and less of that kid, even though he's still there, but he becomes less and less as it goes on, until he's basically full darkness. And so we get moments like his reunion with Gurney is a nice moment where we kind of see, he starts off as, wanted, but then it's like, once they meet again, it's like, oh, this is the kid that I was helping train and all that, and this is a really nice moment. But then just those moments of darkness come, and we also fully believe those. The moment when Beast sees him in the distance and sees him coming out of the fog, and he runs away. And we've seen what Beast is capable of at this point. In very little screen time. We've seen him, chopping heads off left and right. We saw him smashing a dude's face in, doing all this stuff, and just being Beast-like, like showing us how he got that name. And then he sees Paul in the distance and he runs the other direction. And it's just, that alone feels like it's like really sells the transition, and Paul's rise to power and all that, and his rise to like this sort of mythical status. And that's, yeah, and also the moments when he's like integrating himself in with the Fremen, and he has like the whole, like the little naming ceremony. that is where it kind of feels like we can sort of see he's still the kid that's still learning, but there's something is coming and some kind of change is happening, and then obviously once the water of life happens, it's a point of no return essentially, and so that's and you would think doing that, showing the transition through like the montage of battles and stuff like that to show a passage of time, you'd think that would lessen the impact. You would think it would be less convincing, like it would almost be too sped up of a version of him getting from one point to the other. But the point I'm obviously trying to make is that we do get there's multiple. It feels like there's arcs that are happening all the time with Paul from the first one through this one. We can see sort of multiple arcs happening that eventually get him to this point. And even having to do some of it in montage form does not lessen the impact. And like I said, of that moment specifically where Beast runs away from him, by that point, at least to me, I just fully believed that's how powerful and mythical and scary Paul was at that point. So I love the way that turned out. And also just the fact in general that, like, I was talking about with Jessica, where it's like everybody feels a little scarier in this one. And obviously that includes Jessica after she has drank the water of life and become the Reverend Mother, and it's something she almost becomes something out of a horror movie. Like I said, not just the voice changes, but like the look she can give, and her sort of inner monologue, and she's talking about like converting the weak ones, and it's like when she says like we'll start with the weaker ones, she's looking at like this innocent looking family, and it's like just in the fact that when Paul's talking about the visions of her and how whatever their fate is going to be, and it's like there was enough of a mother-son vibe in the first movie to where it doesn't feel like they were always sort of at a distance, but it does feel like now we're almost dealing with two completely different characters now that they've sort of crossed over. But it's almost like this combined sort of power that's gone from seeing a mother and son to being two people who are quite terrifying. And that's a really satisfying transition to see that work like within really the confines of these two movies, even though they are long movies. That's also a thick-ass book that's got a lot that's not in here. And so the fact that they were able to successfully do that for those characters and those arcs it's really satisfying to see that pay off. And another person that has gotten kind of scarier between movies, if you can believe it, is the Baron, where he's got the the soulless moment where he cuts off Yue's head and stuff like that. And there was something intimidating about him in the first movie, but this one we get that scene in the prologue where he promotes Beast, but then there's also this moment where he's like really introduced into the movie, where we hear screaming on the other side of a door, and when Beast goes in, the Baron has like killed these servants. And this is something like when we heard Gurney talking about the Harkonnens in the first movie and how brutal they are, I feel like we're getting much more of a glimpse of what he was talking about here than we ever did in the first one. Even though we got there were brutal moments in the first one, sure. Particularly like the creature and whatever that must have started off as and what they made it into. There's glimpses of it, but here they're just servants are getting picked off left and right and in brutal, soulless ways, and there is something very seemingly more intimidating, which is funny because the Baron actually seems more immobile in this movie, yet somehow seems almost deadlier. In these earlier portions, anyway. But talking about deadly Harkonnens and what they're capable of, and servants being killed left and right, I guess it's time we talked about one of the characters we were all really waiting to see in the Villeneuve Dune universe, which is Feyd-Rautha. And I was a little concerned that he was never introduced in the first movie, because it's like, is he just not going to go down that route? But then again, it is, if I remember, my memory of the book is a little vague, but I feel like Feyd is introduced in the book in the Baron's first scene. He's introduced with the rest of the Harkonnens in like an opening scene of the book, but then it is not until about the time he's introduced in the movie that he comes back in the book and he has his importance like halfway through. Um, but still, the thing about it is that he's not. I think it's about on the digital copy. I checked the time. I think it's like an hour and 10 minutes into this movie. So we've had a 2.5 hour movie already before this, plus an extra hour and 10 minutes before Feyd-Rautha's name is even said out loud. But then he is introduced like right after that, and so you would think, how are they going to kind of just drop this extremely major character into the movie kind of so late and make us feel the impact of him and kind of show his importance in this story? Well, apparently the first step in doing that was hiring Austin Butler, who is... I was talking to my brother the other day about how Austin Butler's basically going to be one of those guys like Brad Pitt was, and still is, where they always said that Brad Pitt was the character actor in a leading man's body, and I think Austin Butler is kind of adopting that, where it's like you see him and you think, oh yeah, he's going to be, this heartthrob or whatever, but he seems very interested in taking these really, really weird sort of roles and these sort of supporting roles or places he could really shine. It's almost like when Brad Pitt stomped his head in, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, he like passed that he passed that gene on to him of take all the weird, crazy roles and do your leading man stuff every now and then. And so what he does here is it is kind of funny because when you read the description of Feyd in the book, it's basically like it kind of sounds like Austin Butler as is. So the idea of making all the Harkonnens kind of have that same look of like, the no hair and just the sort of almost kind of alien-like, monster-like way about them. And doing that instead. He's even doing Stellan Skarsgård's voice. The things, I know, people give him shit for the Elvis voice thing, but it's like, the things he can do with his voice are pretty wild. He's really got a wide range of what he can do with his voice, and he really shows that here, too. But what's really great about what he does with this character is he kind of plays him like, and they've kind of approached the character as almost like emotionless, in a sense, where he does like the evil things that he does, like he'll cut a throat without looking, or he'll lick a knife, or he'll kill somebody, he'll take a flamethrower to somebody, and just seem totally straight-faced about it, despite the fact that he finds pleasure in causing pain. But the way they handle that, though, like when he's about to take a flamethrower to somebody and he says, I know everything I need to know, now the only thing left is pain or something, or the only thing left is pleasure, as he's about to take a flamethrower to somebody. And he's almost emotionless when he says that, but there's just enough coming through to where we can kind of see the pleasure coming through, because while he does seem like he's playing it sort of emotionless, he somehow injects a lot of personality into that, where, like, there's a couple of moments in the, arena scene where he's kind of, in one moment he seems like he's completely emotionless, but in the next he'll, like, laugh, or he'll snarl, or he'll, like, taunt somebody, or he'll scream, even, and it's like, it's unpredictable what sort of expression is going to come next, or what he's going to do next, if he's going to be pleased with something, or angered by something, or surprised by something even. There's this fantastic delivery, like right at the end, where Paul basically drops a big old spoiler on him. And the way he just says, like, is that right? And it's just like, it's so casual, but it's like, but you can sense that, like, he's surprised, but as surprised as Feyd-Rautha is capable of showing you he is. So it's like, it's almost like he's a blank slate, but there's so much personality at the same time. I don't know how that happens, but when you're an extremely talented actor, you can do that. And we're also looking at stuff. And also, what I was going to say real quick about him coming into the movie so late is just the fact that not only do they make him, does he practically steal the movie when he comes into it, but the idea of giving him like a whole chunk of time for his introduction. Because we basically get his introductory scene, and then the arena scene, and then a scene that shows that he's just completely unafraid of the Baron. Like he basically says, you know, I could kill you right now for trying to kill me in the arena, essentially. And then that flows right into Lady Fenring seducing him by way of the Gom Jabbar sort of ceremony, and that's it makes perfect sense if you were gonna seduce Feyre to do it with pain. Um, it's like it all adds up perfectly, and then the way they integrate him into the story by his connection to Lady Fenring after that. I don't even know what's a spoiler at this rate. Like I said, the book is, you know, from the '60s, and the movie's been out for almost 2 months, and it's but I'm going around some stuff anyway. But yeah, so all of that is like a whole introduction to it. So he gets a whole chunk of the movie to himself when he's first introduced. So that, I feel like, kind of balances out the screen time that he doesn't have prior, to show how crucial he is to the story, while also being like still a supporting character, but a very major supporting character. I feel like time wise they dealt that out pretty well. And then to talk about characters that we do know, but we didn't get to know very much in the first movie, particularly Chani and Stilgar, where we talked about the Chani scenes earlier, and there's also the thing about her is the idea of we're essentially watching Paul through her, so I guess it almost kind of feels like she's like sort of our stand-in as an audience, and it's like usually that's kind of taken as it's used as a criticism for like lack of character development, but here I think it really works because it feels like to watch the way she's reacting to Paul is kind of helping it along, because it does seem like I've heard there's been issues with this story going all the way back to, like, you know, the book's first existence, of people not really gripping what exactly Paul is as far as protagonist or future antagonist or hero or, you know, pending supervillain or whatever he's going to be. So to kind of see the way Chani reacts to him is kind of almost feels like our guide to how are we supposed to feel about what Paul's choices are and what he's doing here and as he's rising to power. And it's like how the way Chani's getting more like almost afraid or ready for something terrible. In the way Zendaya has to convey that to basically set the scene for what's going on here, I feel like can be sort of undervalued for how crucial it is to how we react to the movie itself and Paul's character specifically. And I think another thing she does that's really impressive is her performance in this one feels so lived in. I almost kind of kept forgetting that she's only in the first movie for like 2 minutes. Like, she's mostly like visions where she doesn't really say much of anything, and then basically the end of the first movie, and that's it. Like, it felt like we had been with the character for so long already by the time this movie starts, even though we really haven't. I found that really impressive, that I just kind of kept forgetting that she was barely in the first movie, and how she already felt like such a major character immediately when this one started. And as far as Stilgar goes, Javier Bardem was having a lot of fun with this, I think. And I love the fact that Bardem is an actor that's kind of known for being, like, you know, sort of stoic and often scary. Like, the first thing people are going to think of is Anton Chigurh, which might make you forget how playful of an actor Bardem can be if you watch, like, you know, Skyfall or The Counselor or something like that. Bardem loves to play, and he's really fun when he does it. And in this particular case, I was a little, I don't know, I was kind of surprised. I honestly can't remember how much this translates from the book or how much of it might come from the book. But Stilgar is like an almost comedic character completely for a lot of this, where it's like, but the fact that there is a balance there, though, where it's like the idea that he's like, you know, this super fanatic that is absolutely 100% convinced that Paul is the one, where it's him saying Listen Al-Gaib is like a meme now. And it's like the more he believes that Paul is the one, almost like the more comedic it becomes, the more fanatic he becomes. and throwing in little moments there, like when he's talking about like the desert spirits, and he like tries to jump scare Paul unsuccessfully, and stuff like that. And you could almost say there's almost too goofy of a nature to him, but because Bardem is Bardem, he is going to find a balance. And the fact that this character, Stilgar himself, is so strong and nuanced, that there are moments, like his moments with Jessica are really great and really grounded, and you sort of get that sense of doom that's going to be Jessica's sort of future character. But there's also stuff like the moments like after the first Harkonnen attack after Fade takes over, is this like really serious moment with him, and it's at that point where it's like then it becomes a character we kind of start to take more seriously, and there's almost like a tragedy to him, despite the fact that everything he's what's the word? He's validated by the time we get to the end of this. But the way they were able to put those comedic beats in while also making us not completely stop taking the character seriously is something that this really nice sweet spot that Bardem found for the character, which is really great. So I guess that's pretty much about it. Usually it's like, it'll be the characters and then it'll be whatever else in the closing thing. But I think I talked about everything I wanted to talk about before I talked about the characters. So that's pretty much what I want to say. So yeah, this one, it does kind of feel like one complete story now. And the big question is always like, is he going to do Dune Messiah now? And it's like, it kind of feels like he has to, and it sounds like he has plans to. I heard he might want to do that. Villeneuve might want to do like that Arthur C. Clarke thing before he does Dune Messiah, but the fact that, there's... He wants to do like that one to kind of complete Paul's story and then go from there. And that sounds about perfect to me. And then, like, if somebody else wanted to pick it up and, like, kind of in the vein of him, I could see that happening. But whether or not this can be matched will be really... I don't know how much higher the bar could possibly be as far as if you're going to pick up where Villeneuve left off after he does a third movie. I guess we'll see in the future, but it's crazy now that these movies exist, because I still remember even before I'd even read the novel, hearing people say like, oh, Dune is unfilmable, it's unfilmable and stuff like that. And people like dismissing Lynch's movie and stuff like that. Lynch's movie is kind of its own thing. I feel Lynch's movie is more faithful than I feel like people remember. But it's also doing its own weird shit. But, it's Lynch. You kind of have to run with that. But this is still... I mean, obviously there's changes here and there's stuff taken out here and there. The change with with Paul's sister, we'll say, I feel like is a welcome one, where it's like, that's something where it's like, I'm not sure how you could film that, and it could go over. But it's clear they're planning a direction with that character still, obviously. So there's that. But and what they're doing with Chani, where that last shot of her, that's like this sort of ambiguous shot of what she's going to be doing from here on out. That's something that's really interesting. That's also a really good sort of... It feels like a nice complete story, but it's also like there's a little cliffhanger in there. Obviously, there's quite a cliffhanger as far as the whole big picture. But for her specifically, I'm really curious what they're going to do with that, and what Zendaya can do with the character also. Now she's shown her strengths of being able to really draw us to this character with even just little amounts of time. So I think that's pretty much it. I'm probably going to think of like a million more things to say when I'm done here, but I feel like I've said a million already, so I'm just going to stop here. So there's a couple more of these reviews I'd like to get to within this week. Where I was going to kind of do, like, stuff from earlier this year, and then there's more current stuff. It's probably going to be, like, mixing and matching. Like, it'll be videos that have, like, newer and stuff from, like, January and February and stuff like that, and just kind of mixed together. So we'll see if we can get caught up on these 2024 movies. So until the next thing, I think that's it.